Welcome to the Alaska Weather Show. I'm meteorologist Peter Chan, coming to you from the National Weather Service on this Monday, April 11th, 2022. We do this each day through a unique partnership with Alaska Public Media. And if you ever want additional weather information, you can go online to weather.gov, and it's a point-and-click map that allows you to bring up all sorts of weather information, forecast watches, warnings, and advisories, so much more. Looking at the map this afternoon, we have blizzard warnings that have been issued for the western Dakotas. Fire danger is very high. Red flag warnings extending from southern South Dakota through Nebraska, the middle plains down into the southwest there through parts of southern Arizona and across New Mexico. Other winter storm warnings and winter weather advisories continue throughout the northwest quadrant of the country, all the way back toward Oregon and northern California, along with a lot of windy conditions across the interior west. So you can check that out, even some severe weather there in southeast Oklahoma on up into Arkansas. For us, the big weather story happens to be high pressure affecting much of the state. We have a blocked pattern called an omega block because the shape of it resembles, at least the flow of the upper level winds resembles that of the Greek letter omega, with the high pressure being in place over the mainland and low pressure sitting off toward the either side, one in western Canada, the Pacific Northwest of the continental U.S., and then the other low sitting out over the southwestern Bering Sea. We are going to see some strong Taku winds set up this evening and overnight in the Juneau area. As a result, there is a high wind warning. I'll highlight that in just a moment. And going into the day on Tuesday, the Panhandle will see some sunshine again, but continued breezy, so it's going to make it feel cooler. Expect lighter winds there by Wednesday. And temperatures are going to be moderating, a rather mild stretch of weather here for southwest into the interior, south central areas. Number of places will see readings in the 40s, even 50-degree reading. Could hit 50 degrees by Wednesday afternoon there at Fairbanks. But mid to late month is trending a bit cooler than normal, and I'll show you that toward the end of this presentation. So we have the high wind warning that is in effect for Juneau tonight into early Tuesday morning for northeasterly winds that could gust as high as 60 to 70 miles an hour. There's a tight pressure gradient over the Panhandle as the result of a strong area of high pressure further north there up across the Yukon Northwest Territories. In fact, it's above 1050 millibar high. That's pretty decent for this time of year. Arctic Village this morning had the state low at 13 below zero. But as I mentioned, milder air is creeping up northeastward through the Yukon Valley, and so temperatures are going to be warming there and through the central and eastern interior. Cold Bay, though it was a blustery day there, windy with some scattered snow showers, temperature at 38 degrees there across the Alaska Peninsula. Soldotna on the west side of the Kenai Peninsula had clear skies, 42 degrees, a beautiful day there. And Wrangell enjoying clear skies, but breezy and cool, temperature 38. And you look at the water, you can see the wind ripples, and that may even be some blowing dust there on the other side of the channel. And one quick reminder, Alaska weather zone change. Cantwell, Denali area, Hooper Bay, and Chevac now will fall under forecast responsibility of the Fairbanks office. Metasta Lake and Chisana, the eastern Alaska range, will fall under the jurisdiction of Anchorage instead of Fairbanks. That transfer was made back in April 5th. And new marine zone established there, 201 for Etolan Strait to Dowell Point, and that'll be the responsibility of the Fairbanks office. Looking at the satellite imagery, a lot of clear skies throughout the Gulf, up through the interior, through the Alaska range, but we do have some cloudiness, snow showers back there across British Columbia, and then see the curl in the clouds, low pressure south of the eastern Aleutians, and that little low is lifting northward, but the main area of low pressure is just sitting and spinning out there over the western half of the Aleutians. Much of the Bering Sea has some lower cloudiness and areas of lighter precipitation. So this afternoon you can see that ridge of high pressure extending from the lower Gulf all the way on up into the Canadian Arctic coast. That high will continue to build overnight and be as high as 1053, high centered on the Yukon Northwest Territories come tomorrow early morning. Pressure gradient continues there, pretty tight there. The isobars packed across the Panhandle, so it'll be windy overnight, breezy tomorrow. Back out toward the west, there's that other low, so it makes that omega pattern sitting out over the western Aleutians. Not much change as we go into Tuesday. High pressure still out over the Gulf, and we have a low sitting down there toward Vancouver off the coast of Washington State. And then a couple of lows, one weaker, one south of the Alaska Peninsula, and the main area of low pressure sitting again out there even into midweek over the western southwest Bering Sea, with broad areas of lighter precipitation and lower cloudiness, even extending inland to the southwest coast, YK deltas on up to near the Seward Peninsula. So lows tonight will be below freezing across the Panhandle and down into the 20s, 6 above at Glen Ellen at the Copper River Basin. Temperatures, though, tomorrow, it'll be cool through the Panhandle, mainly in the 30s during the day. Areas, though, will warm up. McGrath could be up near 50 degrees, as will areas downslope there of the Alaska Range. And then for Wednesday morning lows, still single digits, the Copper River Basin below freezing across much of the area. But afternoon temperatures should recover back up even in through the Panhandle, getting back up into the 40s with lighter winds in the Panhandle on Wednesday. Look at that, it could be 51 up there around McGrath, as well as 50 around Fairbanks. We'll show that in a moment. Temperatures tonight, single digits, maybe a few areas a little below zero there up toward the Yukon Flats. Tuesday afternoon, at least 48 or so there at Fairbanks, and low temperatures come. Wednesday morning will be chillier along the Arctic coast, below zero, but you can see readings 50 there at Fairbanks, and as we get down toward McGrath, so definitely a little taste of milder weather. Southwest interior, we are looking for temperatures to be in the 20s and teens tonight, otherwise above freezing, extending out along the Alaska Peninsula and the Aleutians. 40s to near 50, 50 as I said, McGrath, and over toward King Salmon, 51. And then Wednesday morning lows, upper teens to middle 20s, the southwest interior, near 30 along the coast, the YK deltas, and again 40s going up the Kuskokwim River Basin, with even some readings near 50 degrees. And as we look at the temperature outlook here, going through mid and entering the latter portion of the month, the 6 to 10 day outlook has below normal temperatures centered on much of the east, especially along and just north of the Alaska Range. Areas of the southwest, the Alaska Peninsula, Bristol Bay could average a bit above normal. And then a little further along, we could see more widespread temperatures averaging below normal here for the latter period, the 19th through the 25th, centered on the Yukon Valley, especially along and north of the Alaska Range, butting up to the Brooks Range. And precipitation is anticipated to average below normal April 17th through the 21st across the northwest half of the state, a little above normal perhaps in the Panhandle. This tends to be a little drier time of the year for them. And then for April 19th through the 25th, precipitation will continue to average below normal on the west side of the state, especially perhaps from the Seward Peninsula down into the lower Yukon River Basin. And areas of the southeast could end up seeing precipitation average just a little bit above normal there as we head on up through the third, entering the fourth week of April.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
Well, let's move along now to your flying weather. And if you do have a flight planned Tuesday into Wednesday, the main weather feature will be what we call an omega block. Omega, like as in the Greek letter, it's kind of in the shape of this W. Rounded W, I should say. High pressure will be centered over the Gulf, extending up into the mainland, and also over northwest Canada and along the Russian Arctic coast. And then on either side of that, we'll have low pressure residing, especially the western half of the Bering Sea, and into western Canada, just north there of Vancouver. And as a result, we expect widespread VFR conditions across much of the central, southern mainland into the Panhandle. We will expect some IFR Tuesday morning along the Arctic coast, centered on Barrow, Utqiagvik, and then also across the much of the Bering along the Yukon, lower Yukon Delta, and down into the eastern Aleutians, tip of the Alaska Peninsula. And we see for Tuesday afternoon widespread IFR conditions across the Bering and the length of the Aleutians on up into the tip of the Alaska Peninsula. But a lot of VFR, clear skies, areas of the mainland, Panhandle, and in through the Gulf. Wednesday morning, we could see pockets of IFR along the Brooks Range, perhaps the Yukon Flats, and then out toward the west, parts of the Seward Peninsula, Norton Sound, St. Lawrence, southward, also Bristol Bay, and down along the length of the Alaska Peninsula. And Wednesday afternoon, once again, we expect the IFR conditions to be widespread across the Bering Sea and the Aleutian chain, but plenty of VFR again across central southern areas and into the Panhandle, though As mentioned, there could have some breezier conditions for Tuesday, still holding up there across the panhandle with offshore flow. So past conditions as we round about state widespread VFR conditions at the major passes we forecast for Anaktuvik as well as Adigan in the north. We'll see VFR conditions flying south across the Yukon Valley and into the western arm of the Alaska Range VFR at Lake Clark and Merrill. And as we round out there into the central areas, rainy VFR as well as windy pass. And as we head through the eastern Alaska Range, look for VFR conditions at Isabel and Metasta. And then cutting down across the Copper River Basin, Tanita pass VFR on Tuesday, and further south to along the northern Gulf Coast, Prince William Sound, widespread VFR conditions there at Portage Pass, and as well as much of the Panhandle, though it could be a bit bumpy there in the north end with that stronger north-northeast offshore flow. Chilkoot and White, though, we'll see VFR conditions on Tuesday. Freezing levels, a quick check. Surface freezing line runs along just outside in the morning, outside of the Panhandle, northern Gulf Coast, cutting across Kodiak Island, the central Alaska Peninsula, rising upwards toward the lower Kuskokwim Delta, and then back out over the central Bering. A bump of 2,000 and 4,000 foot freezing levels extend up into the southwest and along the west side of the Alaska Range, as well as far north as in the vicinity of St. Matthew and Nunavik Islands, and areas freezing levels around 5,000 feet there at the tip of the Alaska Peninsula. Greatest threat for any icing will exist. There are some bands of moisture that will be moving up into the tip of the Alaska Peninsula. There could be some considerable moderate icing between 9,000 and 16,000 feet, especially on the Pacific side of the Alaska Peninsula, and then running up through eastern and northwestern parts of the Bering between 9,000 and 16,000 feet, and then another pocket of moderate icing there on the western side of the central Aleutians, 4,000 to 14,000 feet. Upper level winds at 30,000 feet. This is where we can kind of see that omega pattern. We have a low out over the southwestern Bering, high pressure centered out over the west side of the Gulf, and then low pressure north of Vancouver. And if you follow the wind field up through the eastern Bering, up across the mainland, and then back down across northwest Canada, kind of takes that shape of the Greek letter omega. And coming down to mid-levels, 9,000 feet, persistent feature, same thing. We have some stronger winds coming onshore there in the southwest, lower Kuskokwim Delta, across the Alaska Peninsula, 40, 50 knots. Out of the south-southwest. We also see offshore flow there, parts of the Panhandle, 35 to 45 knots, and then the central and eastern Aleutians getting some winds a little stronger there. Bringing it down to 3,000 feet, we see those stronger winds, Bristol Bay, Alaska Peninsula, on up to the southwest coast, 40 to 50 knots, and also in the central Aleutians. So we do anticipate turbulence. Surface to 3,000 feet, central Aleutians. Surface to 4,000 feet, maybe a pocket of isolated severe turbulence there in through the Alaska Peninsula. And then out toward the east, northern Panhandle especially, surface to 6,000 feet.
Hello and welcome to this edition of Alaska Weather Facts. I'm meteorologist Carrie Haisley, Chief of the Emergency Services and Multimedia Branch for the National Weather Service in Anchorage. With me today I have Dr. Doug Wesley, a physical scientist for the National Weather Service Alaska Region Headquarters. Doug, thank you so much for joining us today.
You're welcome, Carrie. Hello.
Hello. So you're here to talk to us a little bit about something called AKwx, which is the Community Collaborative Rain, Hail, and Snow Network. And I understand that AKwx is a network of volunteers who take weather observations. Can you tell us a little bit more about what AKwx is?
Yes, it began in the lower 48, 20 some years ago, and it's expanded during those 2 decades. They're getting something like 10 to 15,000 rainfall reports per day from the lower 48.
Wow, that's a lot of different reports. So how many reports do we get in Alaska right now?
Well, it varies, maybe 10 to 25. But if you consider the large areas we're talking about, we have a lot of gaps to fill. Any observation is better than no observation, but there are large areas in Alaska. Alaska covers 3 million square miles. There's a lot of data gaps in that space, so we'd like to enhance it.
Sure. So tell us then a bit about why these observations are so important to Alaska and why we need to expand the number of them that we're getting.
Yes, Alaska, as you know, has large areas with a lot of complex terrain, and there are no weather observing stations or radar. So CoCoRaHS can help fill the data gaps, so you can at least get some idea of what's actually falling from the sky at those locations. CoCoRaHS increases the amount of timely weather observations available to meteorologists and other decision makers, especially in hazardous type of weather, both rain and snow and the occasional hailstorm that we get up here. CoCoRaHS observations can help forecasters identify long-term precipitation and snowfall trends in a climate sense. And just overall, they increase the amount of timely weather observations available to the public.
So then let's talk a little bit about each of the different types of observations. So it's the rain, hail, and snow network. So let's start by talking a little bit about rain observations and tell us a little bit about how you take those and how long it takes a volunteer to get a rain observation.
Okay, this is a 4-inch gauge, just the basic gauge, which you use for both rain and snowfall. But the rain observations are pretty quick. It's a matter of 2 or 3 minutes that each volunteer goes out and takes a reading, and then they enter these on the computer, and they're immediately available for observation on the computer and on the maps, so that you can see your report. In the wintertime, it's a little bit more complicated. We require the observers to measure not only the snow accumulation, but also liquid equivalent. So they've got to melt the snowfall. This involves 2 of these gauges and a snowboard. And it's maybe a 10-minute observation per day during the winter. But the snowfall is so variable that even across town and in especially the remote areas, it's crucial that we increase this number of snow observations in the network.
Right. I understand that we can only take observations in places where we have weather service offices. And so we rely on all of these volunteers to help us fill gaps. And it's also interesting to know how snowfall varies across like large spaces or even small cities. So I notice here in Anchorage, for example, we can have a vastly different amount of snow on the east side of town and the west side of town. And so it seems like these observations would help us to better understand what's going on in places besides just where the office is.
That's correct. In any given snowfall, there are typically large variances, as you know, and we rely on reports from the public and from National Weather Service cooperative spotters to map out the snowfall that occurs so that we can predict it better in the future.
Sure. So we talked about rain observations and we talked about snow observations, and you said for each of those, if it's rain, it only takes a couple minutes, and then it can take about 10 minutes if it's snow. Hail was the other one that we didn't talk about yet. Tell us just a little bit about the hail observations that CoCoRaHS observers take.
Yeah, the CoCoRaHS network, it has a hail pad, and it's just a simple block of styrofoam covered with aluminum foil, and you can approximate the size of hail by measuring the dent that the hail causes on the pad. And this can give us an estimate of hail size. We don't get hail very often in Alaska, but I've seen it 2 or 3 times in my 5 years in Anchorage, and some of it up to a ½ inch. And I'm sure there's been larger hail up in the interior at times.
So let's talk a little bit about how these rain, hail, and snow observations can help forecasters. So we have people who forecast the weather, and we also have people who work on the hydrology side, and I can see that maybe CoCoRaHS will be beneficial to both of them. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Yes, it's beneficial to the hydrologic forecaster who's concerned about flooding, and rainfall comprises one of the causes of a flood, or it can exacerbate high water conditions. So the more the hydrologist has to look at in terms of data from recent rainfall, the more information they have to work with when they're generating a forecast. The weather forecasters in the wintertime at the Weather Service office can use these observations also to help with past case studies, to verify model data, and to get a handle on what's actually happening out the window. And that's important in the forecast process.
Yeah, it seems like you can never have too much information when you're issuing a forecast. So it only takes a few minutes most of the time to take these observations. So let's say I'm interested in becoming a volunteer for CocoRaz. How do I get involved?
Yeah, the website is very useful, cocoraz.org, and it has a number of video-based training tutorials that take you right on from measuring rainfall to a video tutorial on measuring snowfall. It has the maps available in real time, and you can go back and look at that old data too through those maps. And so it's a very useful, comprehensive website.
Very interesting. And anybody can get involved, right? You don't have to be a meteorologist.
That's right. And, we love to have 24, once a day reports throughout the year, but if you can't, then so be it. And we have observers, some observers are out of town for periods of time, or maybe they can only report, a week or two of precipitation, but it's still useful. It's still data that we look at. So the more the better, but you can get involved even if you aren't at a location 24/7.
Doug, I really appreciate you coming on to our program today to talk about CocoRaz. Hopefully we can have you back in the studio at some point so we can talk more about it and then talk more about the different types of observations and the tools that observers use.
That would be great. Yeah.
So thank you for your time, and thank you so much for joining this edition of Alaska Weather Facts.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Well, let's take a look now at the sea ice edge. We'll start out with the west and southwest coast, and it is going to begin to at least retreat a little bit northward as we expect a little milder temperatures and the melting that occurs this time of year, especially along the sea ice edge. And there have been some polynyas, areas of open ice that have developed off the southwest coast there and in through Norton Sound. As we go up along the Chukchi Sea, there have been a few polynyas open up as well, but still a lot of ice in place up there. There was a little larger polynya between Point Lay and Cape Lisburn that has at least shrunk a bit, but we do expect at least the ice to slowly continue its melt, especially the southern extent there in the Bering Sea. Main weather story will be the winds across the Panhandle inner channels tonight. We are looking at some gusts to storm force out of the northeast. Juneau area high wind warning, and on Tuesday still gusty winds down Lynn Canal, could gust as high as 50 knots, especially early in the day, and 35 knots there in the vicinity of Petersburg out of the north and northeast. Otherwise along the outer Gulf Coast, 25 to 30 knot winds and waves generally around 9 to 12 feet. Wednesday winds will come down a bit, the inner channels around 15 to 20 knots, south central southern areas, but the Lynn Canal still a northeast wind around 25 knots, but waves are 5 feet. Offshore flow along the outer Gulf Coast generally 20 to 25 knots, waves generally running around 6 feet. Northwest Gulf, lighter winds in place. We have a ridge of high pressure south of this area, so as a result of variable winds around 10 knots, Prince William Sound, the upper portion, half or so of the Cook Inlet, and then areas the entrance of Cook Inlet and along the Kenai coast out of the east at 10 to 15 knots. And Wednesday, even lighter winds. Look across much of the region, just light and variable winds, generally 5 to 10 knots, and waves pretty negligible. Looking on Tuesday, northeast winds, Shelikof Strait only 15 knots. As we extend out along the Alaska Peninsula, winds will be out of the east-southeast, 25 to 30 knots, strongest there east of Chicknick and Sandpoint, where waves could be as much as 10 feet offshore. On Wednesday, look for a continuation of winds out of the southeast to 30 knots on both the North Pacific and Bering side, though Shelikof Strait will see some lighter winds as you get out there toward the mouth of Cook Inlet. And then across the Aleutian chain, winds will be out of the southeast to south, only 15 to 20 knots in the eastern Aleutians, picking up to about 25 to 30 knots from the south from Atka westward through Adak. And then on Wednesday, look for southerly 35 to 40 knot gale force winds across the eastern and central Aleutians, waves 10 to 13 feet on the North Pacific side and 7 to 9 feet on the Bering side. Across the southwest and west central coast, winds will be out of the east-southeast, generally 20 to 25 knots. The ice could retreat a little bit northward there, especially as it extends east of St. Paul. And on Wednesday, winds will continue, pick up a bit there over the lower portion of the ice there toward the eastern part of the Bering at 30 to 35 knots from the southeast. And then along the Arctic coast, winds will be northerly at around 15 knots, Utqiagvik through Prudhoe Bay, though ahead of a weak trough, it's southeasterly at Kaktovik. And then along the lower Chukchi Sea, 25 knot winds from the northeast, and turning more easterly as you get along the west side of the Seward Peninsula and north of St. Lawrence Island. Areas of the far north Arctic coast there on Wednesday will see winds generally out of the north-northwest, 10 to 15 knots, accelerating to 30 knots from Wainwright down toward Point Ley and off of Cape Lisburne. And then more easterly winds through the Bering Strait and on the north side of St. Lawrence Island at about 20 knots. High pressure quite strong over the Northwest Territories late tonight, early on Tuesday morning. Low pressure sitting back out toward the southwest Bering Sea, and we'll continue to see high pressure extend from the Gulf on up into the central eastern mainland into northwest Canada. Low pressure off of Vancouver, and then also again continuing to sit off of the far western Bering western Aleutian chain. And that pattern, that omega block pattern, will continue into the day on Wednesday. So that's all the time I have for tonight's show, and I certainly thank you for joining me, and be sure to join Joel Curtis for tomorrow evening's show. Thank you for watching.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.